Captain Lucy Barnes stood at the edge of the demilitarized zone with nothing but her M4 rifle, 3 magazines totaling 90 rounds, and the coordinates of where enemy forces were holding her captured reconnaissance team. At 31 years old, with short blonde hair and ice-blue eyes that had seen too much combat, she'd been ordered to wait for a negotiated release. But Lucy had watched enough hostage situations end badly to know that waiting meant watching her soldiers die on video. The intelligence was clear. Her 4-person team had been ambushed during a routine patrol and dragged across the border into enemy-controlled territory, where they were being held in a compound 20 kilometers inside hostile terrain. Command said a rescue operation would take 72 hours to plan and execute properly. Lucy's captured soldiers didn't have 72 hours. The enemy had already released a video showing them bound and threatened with execution within 24 hours. So she made a decision that would either save 4 lives or end her career. She walked across that border alone, with only her service rifle and the conviction that she wouldn't abandon her team just because the mission was impossible. The situation had developed rapidly. Lieutenant Marcus Webb's 4-person reconnaissance team had been conducting a routine border observation mission when they'd encountered an enemy patrol in disputed territory. The engagement had been brief but devastating. The enemy had overwhelming numbers and had captured Webb's entire team before backup could arrive. Within 6 hours, enemy propaganda channels had released a video. 4 American soldiers bound and kneeling, with masked fighters standing behind them, holding weapons. The message was clear in broken English. American invaders captured. You have 24 hours to withdraw all forces from our territory, or these soldiers die on camera for the world to see. Command's response had been immediate but bureaucratic. Initiate diplomatic channels, prepare a rescue operation, but do nothing precipitous that could endanger the hostages or escalate the situation. Lucy had listened to the briefing with growing frustration. She knew these soldiers personally. She'd trained with them, led them on missions, trusted them with her life. Lieutenant Webb was one of the best junior officers she'd ever worked with. Sergeant Elena Rodriguez was a combat medic who'd saved countless lives. Corporal James Mitchell and Specialist Amy Carter completed the team. All of them skilled, dedicated soldiers who deserved better than being used as propaganda tools. Captain Barnes, Colonel Richard Morrison had said during the briefing, I understand your connection to these soldiers, but we need to handle this through proper channels. A hasty rescue attempt could get them killed. Sir, with respect, that video was released 6 hours ago. In 18 hours, they're threatening execution. What diplomatic channel works that fast? We're doing everything we can. The rescue operation is being planned, but these things take time. We need intelligence on the compound location, enemy strength, approach routes, extraction plans. Rushing in blindly gets everyone killed. Lucy had nodded, appearing to accept the explanation, but she'd already made her decision. After the briefing, she'd sought out Captain David Chen, the intelligence officer who'd been tracking the enemy movements. Chen, off the record, do you know where they're holding my team? Chen had hesitated, then pulled up a map on his tablet. This is not official intelligence, and I'm not authorizing anything, but satellite imagery shows increased activity at this compound. It's approximately 20 kilometers inside enemy territory in a valley that's heavily patrolled. If I were planning a rescue, which I'm not, that's where I'd look. How many enemy forces? Best estimate? The compound itself has maybe 20 to 30 fighters, but the surrounding area has patrols, checkpoints, and rapid response units. Anyone approaching that compound would be detected and facing overwhelming numbers within minutes. What about approach routes? Chen had looked at her carefully. Lucy, whatever you're thinking, don't. That compound is in the middle of enemy-controlled territory. A solo infiltration would be suicide. I'm just trying to understand the tactical situation. The tactical situation is impossible. The only reason Command is considering a rescue at all is because we might be able to insert a full platoon with air support and fight our way in and out. One person alone? That's not a mission. That's martyrdom. Lucy had thanked him and left, already planning what came next. She'd spent the next 4 hours preparing. She couldn't take official military equipment without leaving a paper trail, so she worked with what she could acquire quietly. Her M4 rifle was her personal weapon, already zeroed and familiar. She gathered 3 magazines, 90 rounds total, which would have to be enough. She acquired civilian clothes that would let her move without immediately identifying as military. She studied the maps Chen had shown her, memorizing terrain features and approach routes. At 0200 hours, while the base slept, Lucy had walked out of forward operating Base Guardian, carrying nothing but her rifle, ammunition, and determination. The border was 10 kilometers away. She covered the distance in 90 minutes of careful movement through terrain she knew from months of operations in the region. At the border, marked by nothing more than a dry riverbed, and the understanding that crossing it meant entering enemy territory, she paused. This was the point of no return. Crossing this border without authorization was a career-ending violation of military regulations. If she survived, she'd face court-martial. If she didn't survive, she'd be remembered as a reckless officer who'd gotten herself killed for nothing. But on the other side of that border were 4 soldiers who trusted her, who'd followed her orders, who deserved a leader willing to risk everything to bring them home. Lucy crossed the border at 0345 hours. The first 5 kilometers were relatively easy, open terrain with scattered vegetation, navigable in darkness. She moved carefully, using night vision techniques and terrain features to remain undetected. At the 6-kilometer mark, she encountered her first obstacle, an enemy checkpoint on the road she needed to cross. 2 fighters with a vehicle, checking anyone moving through the area. Lucy observed from concealment for 20 minutes, studying their patterns. They were alert, but not disciplined, talking, smoking, paying more attention to the road than to the surrounding terrain. She bypassed them through a rocky area 50 meters from the checkpoint, moving slowly to avoid making noise. It took 30 minutes to move past them, but she cleared the obstacle without being detected. The next 8 kilometers were more challenging. The terrain became more rugged, with valleys and ridgelines that slowed movement. She also began encountering signs of enemy activity: vehicle tracks, discarded equipment, fighting positions that had been recently occupied. She was deep in enemy-controlled territory now. Every step forward increased the risk of detection and made extraction more difficult. But she kept moving, navigating by compass and memory toward the compound Chen had identified. At 0730 hours, just after sunrise, Lucy reached an elevated position overlooking the target compound. She'd covered 20 kilometers through enemy territory in 4 hours, exhausted but mission-focused. Through her rifle scope, she observed the compound, several buildings within a walled perimeter, guards visible at the entrance and on rooftops. She counted approximately 25 enemy fighters visible, which matched Chen's intelligence estimate. But where were her captured soldiers? She spent the next hour conducting careful observation, looking for any sign of Webb's team. Finally, she spotted them, 4 figures in American uniforms, hands bound, being moved between buildings under guard. They were alive. That was the important thing. But the tactical situation was exactly as Chen had described. Impossible. The compound was in the middle of enemy territory, surrounded by fighters with no easy approach or extraction route. A conventional rescue would require a full platoon with air support. Lucy had none of that. She had an M4 rifle with 90 rounds and absolutely no backup, which meant she needed to be unconventional. She spent the next 2 hours studying the compound's patterns and vulnerabilities. Guard rotations happened every 4 hours. Most of the fighters were concentrated near the main buildings, leaving some areas of the perimeter less defended. The captives were being held in a building on the eastern side of the compound, which was closest to Lucy's elevated position. A plan began forming. Audacious, dangerous, probably suicidal, but possibly workable. At 1100 hours, Lucy made her move. She walked down from her elevated position directly toward the compound's main gate, making no attempt to hide. She kept her M4 rifle slung but accessible, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. The guards at the gate spotted her immediately. They raised their weapons, shouting challenges in their language. Lucy kept walking, hands visible but near her rifle, until she was 50 meters from the gate. Then she stopped and called out in English, I'm Captain Lucy Barnes, United States Army. I'm here to negotiate for my soldiers." The guards were confused, shouting at each other and into radios. Within minutes, more fighters had appeared, weapons raised, surrounding her position. Lucy stood calmly, hands away from her weapon, as approximately 50 armed enemy fighters surrounded her. A man who appeared to be a commander approached, speaking accented English. "American Captain, you walk into our territory alone. You are very brave or very stupid. I'm here to negotiate for the release of my soldiers. The 4 you're holding." The commander smiled without warmth. "Negotiate? You have nothing to negotiate with. You are alone, surrounded by my fighters. Now we have 5 American prisoners instead of 4. "That's one way to see it," Lucy said calmly. "Here's another way. I walked 20 kilometers through your territory to reach this compound. I bypassed your checkpoints, avoided your patrols, and arrived undetected until I chose to reveal myself. If I can do that alone, imagine what a full American rescue force could do." The commander's smile faded slightly. "You are bluffing. If your army was planning rescue, they would not send one woman alone. I'm not here representing my army. I'm here representing myself, a captain who won't abandon her soldiers. My command doesn't know I'm here, but they will know soon, and when they find out I've been captured, the response will be significant. Right now, you have 4 prisoners and a propaganda opportunity. If you harm any of us, you'll have the full weight of American military power focused on this compound." It was a bluff, of course. Command would be furious when they discovered what Lucy had done, and there was no guarantee they'd launch a rescue operation for someone who'd violated orders so flagrantly. But the commander didn't know that. He studied Lucy carefully. "You walked into enemy territory with only rifle and no support. You are either very confident or you have something planned. I'm confident that my soldiers are worth risking my life for." "Are your fighters worth dying for? Because if anything happens to my team, this compound becomes the #1 target for American airstrikes. Every fighter here will die. But if you release my soldiers, this situation ends peacefully and you avoid becoming a traitor." The commander considered this. Lucy could see him calculating, weighing the propaganda value of 5 American prisoners against the risk of making himself a high-priority target. Finally, he spoke. "You will come into the compound. Your soldiers are here. We will discuss this situation." Lucy was escorted into the compound by a dozen armed fighters. Her M4 was taken, along with her ammunition. She was searched for additional weapons and communication devices. They brought her to the building where Webb's team was being held. Her 4 soldiers were there, hands bound, looking exhausted and roughed up but alive. "Captain Barnes," Lieutenant Webb said in disbelief, "what are you doing here?" "Negotiating your release, Lieutenant. You walked into enemy territory alone to negotiate? That's completely against regulations, tactically inadvisable, and probably career-ending. Yes, I'm aware, but I'm not leaving without my team." The enemy commander entered the room. "So, American Captain, you and your soldiers together now. This makes things simpler. We will release video showing 5 American prisoners, and your government will have stronger motivation to meet our demands." "Or," Lucy said, "you could release all 5 of us and this situation ends without anyone dying. Why would I release prisoners who give me leverage? Because holding American soldiers guarantees a military response. Releasing us makes you look merciful and avoids turning this compound into a battleground. You keep your fighters alive, you avoid American attention, and you can claim a propaganda victory by showing mercy. Everyone wins." The commander laughed. "You negotiate from position of weakness. You are prisoners. You have no leverage. I have the leverage of consequence. Hold us, and this compound becomes a priority target. Release us, and we disappear from your life. Which option keeps your fighters alive?" The discussion continued for another 30 minutes, with Lucy calmly pressing her case while the commander weighed his options. She could see him considering the angles, the propaganda value, the military risk, the political implications. Finally, he made a decision. "I will consider your proposal." For now, you will be held with your soldiers. Tomorrow, I decide. Lucy was bound and left with Webb's team in the holding room. The door was locked and guards were posted outside. Once they were alone, Webb spoke quietly. Captain, that was the most insane thing I've ever witnessed. You walked into an enemy compound alone and tried to negotiate our release? I'm not done yet, Lieutenant. Ma'am, we're all bound, surrounded by 50 enemy fighters, and we have 0 weapons. What's the plan? Lucy tested her bonds. They'd been tied hastily with more focus on speed than security. The plan is we wait until 0000 hours, then we escape. Rodriguez looked skeptical. Captain, how? We're bound, locked in, guarded, and in the middle of the enemy territory. When I was being brought in, I observed the compound layout. I saw guard positions, building locations, and perimeter weaknesses, and I may have been relieved of my rifle, but they didn't do a thorough enough search. Lucy shifted position, and a small folding knife fell from a concealed pocket in her boot. Combat knife. They found the obvious weapons, but missed this. Over the next 10 hours, I'll work on getting us all unbound. Then, at 0200, when guard alertness is lowest, we make our move. Mitchell asked the obvious question. And then what? We're still in the middle of enemy territory with no weapons and no extraction plan. And then we improvise. We get outside the compound, acquire weapons if possible, and move toward friendly territory. It's not a perfect plan, but it's better than waiting here to be executed on video. Over the next 10 hours, Lucy carefully worked on cutting through everyone's bonds using the small knife. She had to work slowly to avoid detection by the guards who occasionally checked on them. By 0100 hours, all 5 soldiers had their hands free, though they kept the rope loosely in place to avoid alerting the guards. Lucy briefed the team in whispers. At 0200, I'll create a distraction that draws the guards into this room. When they enter, we take them down quietly, acquire their weapons, and move to the eastern perimeter wall. I identified a section that's poorly lit and minimally guarded. We go over that wall and move east toward friendly lines. Questions? What's the distraction? Carter asked. I'll fake a medical emergency. When the guards come in to check, we ambush them. It's basic, but it should work if we execute quickly. And if it doesn't work? Then we tried. Better than waiting here passively for whatever they have planned. At 0200 hours, Lucy began the distraction, moaning and writhing as if in severe pain, calling out that she needed medical help. After 3 minutes of this, the door opened. 2 guards entered, weapons raised but not aimed, trying to assess what was happening. The 5 American soldiers moved simultaneously. Webb tackled the first guard, while Rodriguez went for the second. It was fast, brutal, and quiet. Within 30 seconds, both guards were unconscious, and the team had acquired 2 AK-47 rifles. Move, Lucy commanded, taking one of the rifles and leading the team out of the building. The compound was quiet at this hour, with most fighters asleep and only minimal security on duty. The team moved quickly but carefully toward the eastern wall, where Lucy had identified their exit point. They encountered one more guard near the wall. Lucy dropped him with a quick strike before he could raise an alarm. They now had 3 rifles among 5 people. Over the wall, Lucy ordered. Webb, Rodriguez, you first. Establish security on the other side. Mitchell, Carter, you're next. I'll come last and cover our exit. The team went over the wall one by one. Lucy was last, and just as she cleared the top, shouts erupted from inside the compound. Someone had discovered the unconscious guards in the empty holding room. The compound lit up with activity. Searchlights came on. Fighters poured out of buildings. Within seconds, the enemy knew the prisoners had escaped. Run, Lucy commanded. East, toward friendly territory. Stay together and don't stop. The team ran through the darkness, putting distance between themselves and the compound. Behind them, they could hear vehicles starting and fighters mobilizing for pursuit. They'd covered maybe 1 kilometer when headlights appeared behind them, vehicles from the compound, moving fast to cut them off. Into that ravine! Lucy pointed to a depression in the terrain that would provide cover. The team dove into it just as bullets began impacting around them. They were pinned down by approximately 20 to 30 enemy fighters with vehicles and automatic weapons. The Americans had 3 AK-47s with limited ammunition and no support. "Captain," Webb said as rounds cracked overhead, "we need a new plan." Lucy was thinking fast. They were 6 kilometers from friendly territory, too far to run with enemy forces in pursuit. They couldn't fight their way through superior numbers, but they couldn't stay pinned here either. Then she heard it, the distant sound of helicopters. "Everyone quiet," she commanded. "Listen." The sound grew louder, definitely American helicopters, approaching from the direction of friendly territory. Lucy's radio, which had been taken from her but was apparently still broadcasting, crackled to life. "Any American forces, this is Rescue 1-1. We're tracking a signal from this area. If you can hear this, pop smoke or use signal mirror." Lucy grabbed a smoke grenade from one of the acquired AK-47 load-bearing vests and threw it. Orange smoke billowed into the pre-dawn sky. "Rescue 1-1, I have your smoke. We're inbound with extraction and close air support." The enemy fighters, seeing the helicopters approach, broke off their pursuit and withdrew. They weren't equipped to fight American air assets. 3 minutes later, 2 Black Hawk helicopters touched down near Lucy's position. The team ran for the aircraft and climbed aboard. As they lifted off, Lucy looked at the pilot. "How did you know where we were?" "Your radio was transmitting a tracking signal. Intelligence tracked you crossing the border, followed your movement to the compound, and when you went silent for several hours, Command authorized a rescue operation. We've been staging at the border waiting for a signal. When you escaped and your radio came back online, we launched." Lucy looked at her radio. Apparently it had continued transmitting even after being taken from her, providing a beacon that led the rescue force directly to them. 1 week later, Lucy stood at attention in Colonel Morrison's office, expecting to receive official discipline for her unauthorized solo infiltration. "Captain Barnes," Morrison said, his expression unreadable, "what you did was reckless, violated direct orders, and could have resulted in 6 American casualties instead of 0. By every regulation in the book, I should be recommending court-martial." "Yes, sir." "However," Morrison continued, "you also successfully infiltrated 20 kilometers into enemy territory, negotiated face-to-face with enemy forces, executed an escape plan that freed all 5 prisoners, and evaded pursuit long enough for rescue forces to arrive. The entire team returned safely with valuable intelligence about enemy operations and leadership." He paused. "From a results standpoint, your mission was a complete success. From a discipline standpoint, you violated every protocol we have. So I'm left with a dilemma. Do I punish a successful rescue or acknowledge that sometimes regulations don't account for the reality of combat leadership?" "Sir, I don't regret my actions. Those soldiers were my responsibility. Waiting for official channels meant watching them die." "I understand. And for the record, off the books, I respect what you did. But officially, I can't condone it." Morrison opened a file. "So here's my decision. You'll receive a formal reprimand for unauthorized operations. That reprimand will go in your file and likely prevent future promotions. But you won't face court-martial, and the mission will be classified in a way that preserves operational security." "I accept those terms, sir." "Good. Because despite this reprimand, Captain Barnes, you're exactly the kind of leader our soldiers deserve. Someone willing to risk everything for their people. That quality is rare. Don't lose it." 3 months later, Lucy was recommended for the Bronze Star for valor, not officially for the solo infiltration mission, but for actions during combat operations that resulted in the successful recovery of captured personnel. The 4 soldiers she'd rescued remained in her unit. They never spoke publicly about what happened, but they knew. Webb, Rodriguez, Mitchell, and Carter understood that their captain had walked into enemy territory alone, faced down 50 armed fighters, and refused to abandon them even when doing so cost her career advancement. 6 months after the mission, Lucy was leading a briefing when a young lieutenant approached her afterward. "Captain Barnes, ma'am, I heard stories about what you did for Lieutenant Webb's team. Is it true you walked into enemy territory alone?" Lucy considered her answer carefully. "Lieutenant, What you need to understand is that leadership isn't about following every regulation perfectly. It's about taking care of your people when it matters most. Sometimes that means working within the system. Sometimes it means accepting that the system's timeline doesn't match the reality your soldiers are facing. But you risked your career, your life, everything. Yes. And I'd do it again without hesitation. Those 4 soldiers trusted me to lead them. When they were captured, that trust didn't end just because the situation became difficult. Leadership means you don't abandon your people just because the mission is hard or the regulations say to wait. The young lieutenant nodded slowly. That's not what they teach at officer school. Officer school teaches you tactics and regulations. Combat teaches you what leadership actually means. There's often a gap between those two things. The best officers learn to navigate that gap without losing sight of what matters, bringing your people home. Lieutenant Webb, who'd been listening nearby, approached after the young officer left. "Captain, you know half the officers on this base think you're crazy for what you did." Lucy smiled slightly. "And the other half?" "The other half wish they had the courage to do the same thing if their people were in danger. You've become something of a legend. The captain who walked into enemy territory alone and walked out with her whole team." "Legends are overrated, Webb. I just did what needed doing." "That's exactly what makes it legendary, ma'am. You didn't see it as heroic or crazy. You saw it as non-negotiable. That's the kind of leader people follow into hell." A year after the incident, Lucy received orders for a new assignment, training the next generation of combat leaders at the Army's leadership school. The formal reprimand in her file had indeed prevented promotion to major, but it hadn't prevented her from being recognized as exactly the kind of leader the Army needed to develop others. On her last day with the unit, her entire company assembled for an informal farewell. Webb spoke for everyone. "Captain Barnes taught us that leadership isn't about rank or regulations. It's about commitment to your people that transcends rules. She showed us that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. We're better soldiers because of her example." Lucy looked at the faces of soldiers she'd served with. Some she'd led on missions, some she'd trained, all of them understanding that what she'd done wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about the fundamental promise every leader makes to their people. "I will not abandon you, no matter the cost." "Take care of each other," Lucy said simply. "That's all leadership really is. Everything else is just tactics." As she left the base for her new assignment, Lucy reflected on the cost of that 20-kilometer walk into enemy territory. A formal reprimand, a stalled career, the knowledge that she'd never make general because she'd chosen her soldiers over regulations. It had been worth every consequence. Because Webb, Rodriguez, Mitchell, and Carter had gone home to their families. Because 4 soldiers who'd trusted her leadership hadn't been abandoned when the system failed them. Because she'd proven to herself and everyone who served with her that some responsibilities transcend all other considerations. Captain Lucy Barnes had walked into enemy territory with only her M4 rifle, facing 50 armed soldiers and impossible odds. She'd negotiated, fought, and refused to quit until every member of her team was safe. Command had called it reckless, regulations had called it a violation, but her soldiers, the ones who mattered most, called it exactly what leadership should be: unconditional, courageous, and absolutely non-negotiable. Years later, when young officers asked her if she'd do it again knowing the cost, Lucy's answer never changed. Every single time. Because the day you won't walk into hell for your soldiers is the day you stop deserving to lead them. Rank and regulations matter, but they matter less than the promise you make when someone puts on a uniform and follows your orders. That promise is simple. I will bring you home. Everything else is negotiable. That promise never is. And when those young officers pressed further, asking how she'd found the courage to walk alone into enemy territory against impossible odds, Lucy's response was even simpler. It wasn't courage. It was obligation. Webb, Rodriguez, Mitchell, and Carter didn't choose to be captured, but they'd chosen to follow my leadership. That created a debt I couldn't ignore. The moment you accept responsibility for leading soldiers into danger, you accept responsibility for bringing them back. No regulation, no career consideration, no fear changes that equation. They trusted me with their lives. Walking into that compound wasn't heroic. It was the minimum requirement of honoring that trust. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories every day.